Hello, history enthusiasts. Welcome to our channel, where we dive deep into the fascinating stories of the past and explore the incredible individuals, events, and turning points that shape the world we live in today. Whether you're a history buff, a student, or just curious about the past, we bring you detailed and engaging content to help you understand the key moments that have defined history. In today's video, we'll be exploring the dramatic and tumultuous life of Napoleon Bonaparte, focusing on his exiles to Elba and Saint Helena and how these moments shaped his legacy. From his escape to Elba, his brief return to power during the 100 Days, and his final years in exile, we'll uncover the story behind one of history's most iconic figures. After Napoleon's defeat in 1814, following his loss in the Battle of Leipzig and the subsequent invasion of France by a coalition of European powers, he was forced to abdicate the throne. The Bourbon monarchy was restored, with Louis XVI being reinstated as the King of France. Napoleon, once the ruler of a vast empire stretching from Spain to Russia, had lost nearly all of his territories. Although many expected Napoleon to face a harsher punishment for his wars of conquest, his fate was not as extreme as other monarchs who had been overthrown. Instead of execution, he was offered exile, a relatively rare mercy for someone of his stature. This outcome speaks to the political climate of the time. While the powers of Europe saw Napoleon as a dangerous figure who needed to be removed from the European stage, they also recognized his talents and influence. Exiling him was seen as a way to contain him while avoiding the consequences of executing a former emperor, which could have led to more turmoil and unrest across Europe. Napoleon was exiled to the island of Elba, located off the coast of Italy. Elba was small, only 86 square miles, but it had a strategic position in the Mediterranean, making it a significant location in terms of both defense and trade. The island had been part of the Grand Duchy of Tuscany, but by the time of Napoleon's exile, it was under the control of the Kingdom of Naples. Elba also had a modest population of about 10,000 people, and although it wasn't an economic powerhouse, it possessed some resources that could be put to use. The Allies allowed Napoleon a considerable amount of autonomy while he was on Elba. The island was not intended to be a prison, but rather a remote, controlled territory where Napoleon could govern, even though his empire was gone. He was given the title Emperor of Elba, a rather symbolic honor, and he was free to rule the island much like a small kingdom. His powers included overseeing the island's administration, implementing reforms, and managing its economy. In addition, Napoleon was allowed to keep a personal guard of soldiers and a naval fleet to ensure the island's security. This independence was an unexpected aspect of his exile, as many expected him to be kept under strict surveillance. Like other dethroned monarchs in history, Napoleon was not content to sit idly by during his time on Elba. Even though his ambitions had been curtailed, he was still an energetic and reform-minded leader. He immediately set about implementing a range of economic and infrastructural improvements on the island. He improved agriculture by introducing new farming techniques and promoting local industries like iron mining. His efforts were aimed at revitalizing the island's economy, creating jobs, and improving living conditions for the inhabitants. In addition to economic reforms, Napoleon initiated significant political changes. He reorganized the government on Elba, creating a more centralized system and introducing new laws to streamline administration. He also created a more efficient system of taxation and made improvements to public works, such as building new roads and improving existing ones. These reforms were aimed not only at improving the island's infrastructure, but also at proving that Napoleon was still capable of governing effectively. Despite these efforts, Napoleon's life on Elba was marked by frustration. His previous grandeur and the sense of ruling over an empire were gone, and he found the isolation and limitation of his powers to be stifling. Napoleon had always been a man driven by ambition, and he could not simply let go of his desire for power. His time on Elba became a period of reflection and plotting, as he bided his time and looked for opportunities to return to France. Napoleon's escape from Elba is one of the most daring and dramatic moments in his entire life. In February 1815, Napoleon began secretly plotting his return to France. He reached out to former supporters, both within France and on the island itself, to organize his escape. Napoleon's return was not just a personal endeavor, but also a political one. He believed that he could restore the French people's faith in him and reclaim the throne for the good of France. On February 26, 1815, Napoleon and around 1,000 loyal followers fled Elba aboard a small ship, the La Saône, and sailed for the French coast. Despite the dangers of the journey, they made it to the southern coast of France, landing near Cannes on March 1, 1815. Upon arrival, Napoleon was greeted by crowds of enthusiastic supporters who had longed for his return. His former soldiers, many of whom had fought under his banner during the Napoleonic Wars, eagerly joined him. As Napoleon marched toward Paris, he garnered more support. Soldiers from the French army, which had been reformed under the Bourbon monarchy, deserted their posts and rallied to Napoleon's cause. By March 20, 1815, Napoleon had successfully regained control of Paris and taken back the throne, beginning the short but dramatic period known as the 100 Days. The period known as the 100 Days began with Napoleon's return to France in March 1815 and ended with his final defeat at the Battle of Waterloo on June 18, 1815. The 100 Days were marked by intense political and military maneuvering, as Napoleon sought to re-establish his dominance in France while simultaneously confronting a newly formed coalition of European powers determined to end his rule for good. Initially, Napoleon attempted to avoid direct conflict with the Allies, but tensions soon escalated. The Seventh Coalition, which included Britain, Prussia, Russia, and Austria, quickly mobilized to counter Napoleon's return. Europe was shaken by his reappearance, as many feared that a prolonged war with Napoleon could bring more destruction to the continent. Napoleon, fully aware that he could not afford to let his return go unchallenged, began preparing for a final military campaign. In the lead-up to his confrontation with the Allies, Napoleon managed to regroup many of his former generals and soldiers, and by the time the decisive Battle of Waterloo arrived, he was ready for one final attempt to secure his place as ruler of Europe. Following Napoleon's catastrophic defeat at the Battle of Waterloo on June 18, 1815, his reign came to an abrupt end. The combined forces of the British and Prussians, under the leadership of the Duke of Wellington and Gebhard Leberecht von Blücher, inflicted a crushing blow to Napoleon's army, ensuring that his time on the throne of France was over for good. In the aftermath of the battle, Napoleon fled to Paris, but his situation was hopeless. The French army was in disarray, and his political supporters quickly abandoned him. This time, the European powers were resolute in their determination to prevent Napoleon from ever returning to power. The British, who had suffered the brunt of Napoleon's military campaigns, were especially eager to ensure that he would not escape again. Rather than risk allowing him to return to another European island, the British sent Napoleon to Saint Helena, a remote and isolated island in the South Atlantic Ocean. Saint Helena was a volcanic island located about 1,200 miles from the African coast, and it was one of the most isolated places in the world at the time. It was small and barren, with only a handful of British military personnel and officials stationed there to guard Napoleon. The island was far too distant for any meaningful escape attempt, making it a more secure choice than Elba had been. Napoleon was placed under strict surveillance, with his movements carefully monitored. He was confined to Longwood House, a residence on a wind-swept plateau far from the main settlement of the island. Though the house had some comforts, it was also damp and uncomfortable, contributing to a steady decline in Napoleon's health. During his years on St. Helena, Napoleon became a subject of both fascination and speculation. His death on May 5, 1821, at the age of 51, marked the end of one of the most remarkable careers in world history. While some rumors suggested he had been poisoned, modern analysis indicates that he died of stomach cancer, a diagnosis confirmed by an autopsy performed after his death. Napoleon's final years were spent in isolation, where he reflected on his life, wrote his memoirs, and corresponded with former allies and officials. His death did not mark the end of his influence. If anything, it added to his mystique. In 1840, his remains were returned to France, where he was buried at Les Invalides in Paris, where he remains to this day. Napoleon's two exiles were crucial in shaping his legacy. His brief time on Elba was marked by reform and the brief hope of a return to power, which he achieved during the 100 Days. However, his ultimate defeat at Waterloo dashed his dreams of ruling Europe again. In contrast, His exile to Saint Helena allowed for a period of reflection and historical writing. Though Napoleon's physical power had been stripped away, his legend continued to grow, and his final years contributed to the myth of Napoleon that has persisted for nearly 2 centuries. Napoleon's influence on European politics, military strategy, and legal systems remains profound. His Napoleonic Code, which he implemented in France and later in other European nations, is still considered one of the most significant contributions to modern legal systems. We hope you enjoy this deep dive into Napoleon's life and legacy. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new video. Be sure to share with your friends if you think they'll enjoy the content.